Alex here with a legal nuts and bolts video on fairness versus the law. This video is not meant to be a philosophical discussion. I'm not trying to trigger a debate in the comments on what I'm about to go into. What I'm actually trying to do is use this video to continue to push my message along, and the message that I've been pushing is that research trumps everything and that statutes, rules, and case law are the road to victory in representing yourself in any type of case. This is a legal nuts and bolts video, but most of my viewers are high conflict child custody viewers, and this video applies to everyone, including them. So before I go into some of the more abstract ideas behind why fairness should not prevail over the law, and please listen to the whole video because fairness does come into play in writing the law. I'm just talking about the idea that the law should be thrown away and that you should just win your case based on the idea of what's fair and what's common sense and all of that. I'm going to get into that later. Give the video a chance. Go through the whole video before you get upset. Some people will probably be upset. But anyway, what I'm going to do right now is go into some examples as to why this would not work in the situations that I describe in the examples, and hopefully people can extrapolate that into why it really wouldn't work anywhere in the law, with maybe the most rarest of rare exceptions. So I want to mention, before I go into the examples, where does this idea come from? I think there's two places that it comes from, at least two places, but the two big ones are, the first one being the more overt one, is that statutes, rules, and case law basically equates to some secret code, mumbo jumbo, nonsensical Latin speak that attorneys use that isn't fair for non-attorneys, because some non-attorneys can't afford a lawyer and they shouldn't lose their case just because of that only. And they should be able to just walk into court and wing it and win their case because they're right, regardless of the fact that some lawyer who went to law school spoke some magical words and won the case. That's the more overt, obnoxious understanding of why common sense and fairness should prevail over the law. The second, which I think is more subtle and subconscious, and I don't think people realize it, but the second is that it's easier. Having to actually research statutes, rules, and case law requires a tremendous amount of critical thinking skills, the ability to separate your subjective idea of what's right versus an objective idea of what's right, and quite frankly takes a lot of time. And I think it's subconsciously driving people in that direction, because if that's actually the solution to the problem, then you don't have to spend 100 or 1,000 hours of work to win your whatever case you're working on. Most of my viewers are child custody, high conflict child custody viewers, so that you don't have to spend 100 or 1,000 hours. You can just roll out of bed, walk into court, and talk and win your case just like they do on Judge Judy and the People's Court. I think that's what a lot of people wish all the other courts were like, because that's what most people, I think, subconsciously, without realizing it, they don't want to do all the work, and it does take a lot of work to understand statutes, rules, and case law, and how to interpret it all and why it matters. So now that I've described where I think these ideas come from, I'll go into some of the examples as to why common sense and fairness would never, well, with the rarest of rare exceptions, why it wouldn't work. Most issues are big issues that affect a lot of people, and they're complicated, and there's multiple different perspectives to approach it from. You have child support, for example. Two people have a child or multiple children. They separate. One person has custody of the children, the other doesn't. And there are different ideas as to what is fair. The person with the child thinks this isn't fair. I should be getting some financial support to help me. The person without the child who has to pay might think, well, whoever wants the child should have to pay for the child. Since you want the child, that's on you. If you don't want the child, I'll take the child and pay for it. Other people might think that if you can't afford to take care of the child, you shouldn't get a child. Some people might think that the child support that is paid should be based on what the child needs to survive. Some people might think that the child support amount should be based on what a person can afford to pay. Some people might think that the child support amount should be based on what the child had become accustomed to while the couple was together. Some people might take these arguments and carry them on into joint physical custody situations and think that, well, with joint custody, you both have the kids, so there's no child support. Some people might think that, well, if people split up with joint custody and one person earns $1 million a year and the other person earns $20,000 a year, it creates this disproportionate level of income between the households, and it's going to create a lot of shock for the child to go from one to the other. So there should be some formula in place where the person who's making a lot more pays the other person child support, maybe not as much if they didn't have joint custody, but at least something to sort of equalize the financial disparity between the homes. I've given you all these different ideas, and they all sound fair from the perspective of the person who is promoting the idea. A lot of people struggle with this. A lot of people think, no, my idea is the right idea. All of you guys are wrong, and I'm going to do what I want to do because it's fair and it's common sense. All of these ideas could conceivably come from common sense. They really could. You have to admit it. And the process that the legislatures of our states and the federal government go through basically involves, or at least ideally, it's supposed to involve, when you don't have corruption and moneyed interests and all these other poisons that go into the equation, it's supposed to come down to taking all of those different perspectives and coming up with principles and applying those principles, and from those principles setting forth a rule which becomes a law, which is what everybody now has to abide by. They basically pick the winner. The winning idea gets chosen, and that becomes the law, and that is forced upon everyone else. It's one of the unfortunate things about law is force. When I talk about principles, I mention certain examples like a child should have enough money to survive, versus a person should have to pay for a child if they want custody of the child. And these come from different perspectives. The idea of whoever wants the child has to pay for the child is more of an idea of taking ownership of what you want. The idea of whoever is vested with custody of the child gets financial support is more about what's best for the child. Of course, these aren't necessarily, I don't want to argue about these things. I'm just kind of showing how ideas come from different foundational principles. Like that's why I have videos like deserving custody and why that doesn't work, because of based on the best interest of the child standard. You can't go to court and get custody because you deserve it. A lot of times people come from that perspective because the other person went to work 40 hours a week and they stayed at home with the kids, and since they had all the time with the kids for all those years, they deserve custody. Whereas the law is written such that, no, we're not going to look at which parent deserves it based on what they put into it. We're going to look at what's best for the kid. And maybe that's what you were doing before, but now that you're splitting up, what's best for the kid is this, this, and this. What I'm trying to say is the legislature comes up with fundamental principles, and based on those principles, they focus on the ideas that are consistent with those principles, and then based on the remaining ideas, they find the one that they want to fashion into a statute. That's the one that controls going forward. This example is just one example of many. Another situation could have to do with car insurance. Mandatory car insurance. If you don't have insurance, you can't drive. And of course, I'm simplifying this. There's more parameters that go into it, like what type of insurance, liability versus full coverage, and the amounts of the insurance and all that. Some people have the idea that it's not fair. You shouldn't force people to pay for a product. People should buy what they want to buy. And if somebody wrecks somebody else's car, they should suffer the consequences. They don't have insurance, so they're going to have to pay for all of the damages instead of just the ones that the insurance company doesn't pay. Other people have this idea that that's not fair. What if their car gets hit by somebody and it's $10,000 worth of damage, and they hold out their hand and they say, okay, you broke my car, give me $10,000. And that person says, you're right, I will own up to it and I will pay you that $10,000 someday when I can pay it. Right now I'm too poor. Here, have $3,000. Okay, well that's great. When am I going to get the other $7,000 so I can fix all this damage? I can't move my car now. Who knows how long it's going to take you to come up with it? Where am I going to get the money from? You have one perspective that says something that sounds like common sense, that sounds fair. You can't make me buy stuff. I can go buy what I want. I don't want insurance. You can't make me. You have another side that also has an argument that comes from common sense and fairness. You just destroyed my car. Now I can't get to work, and you don't have insurance. So it's great that I have a judgment against you, but when am I going to get the actual cash? So here's another example of two different perspectives. Both sides believe they're fair. The legislature has to come up with some kind of statute to make, they have to decide. And they decided in many states, not all, I think there's 1 or 2 states out there that do not require you to get auto insurance. I can't remember which ones they are. I think one might be New Hampshire, and the other one might be Vermont, but I'm not sure. Post in the comments below. And if you're in those states, you don't have to get insurance. And if somebody hits your car and they don't have insurance, you can sue them and you'll get a piece of paper that says they owe you the money, but good luck getting it. I think what happens in a lot of those states is people end up getting full coverage or uninsured motorist coverage. I think that people who are concerned about being struck by another driver adapt, and this is one of the things I was going to say is the purpose of the law is twofold. It's not just to force people to follow a rule, but it's also to place people on notice as to what the rule is. If people know that insurance is mandatory, they might think to themselves, well, I'm not going to pay all that extra for insurance. I'm not going to get full coverage. I'm just going to get liability in case I hit somebody else. The law in my state is that everyone has to have insurance, so I'm going to trust that most people probably have it, and if I get hit, I'll get paid. That same exact person might go, I'm going to go move to New Hampshire. Uh-oh, there's no law here requiring people to have insurance. In my other state, I just went with the minimum, but here, I'm going to instead go ahead and get full coverage on my vehicle plus uninsured motorist coverage. The law doesn't necessarily have to be a punitive thing. It also places people on notice. It tells people what the rule is with the expectation that people will react to that rule. This is something that happens in business, in banking. That's what these guys do, these moneyed interests. Ordinary people sometimes struggle with this. They don't understand maybe little teeny tiny details, and I think that's why a lot of people get confused and frustrated and angry with things like alimony and child support. I don't think people get very frustrated and angry with things like speed limit, red lights, not running the lights, getting insurance, because ordinary people typically understand law in the sense of what is passed around rumor, through the rumor mill. Everyone, talks and laughs about all these laws when they're out, I don't know, watching a football game or having dinner. And so people understand all these laws. And so they're not really that upset about, oh, well, I got a ticket, because I knew what the rule was. I shouldn't have been going that fast. People are upset when they have to pay alimony even though their ex cheated on them, because to them it seems unfair. But they didn't do any of the research, and they don't understand how alimony works, and they don't understand case law and publications because they don't care. It's not that important. It's boring. And so it hits them as a shock, and that's what makes people get so angry. It's because they weren't placed on notice. Had they been placed on notice, they may have made a different decision. They may have decided, you know what, you're not working. That's not what I signed up for when we got married. I don't want to let this thing become a 3 or 4 year thing and then have to pay you alimony if we split up. I'm just going to leave you right now, and you can just pay for your own stuff. Some people might think, oh, child support, I didn't know that I could, be forced to pay for our child to go into college from 18 to 24. There's this new law that's in place. And so the law places people on notice, and it may cause them to make different choices, having them understand what the law is. When people don't understand what it is, that's when people get angry. And most of the time, people fall back on fairness and common sense, because when somebody doesn't understand what the rules are and it feels unfair and they get sneak attacked by it or sideswiped, they think, what the heck, this makes no sense. I didn't know this was the rule. And in fact, not only did I know it wasn't the rule, but it's not fair. And since it's not fair and it's not common sense, I'm not going to follow it. And I hate the system and it's corrupt and this, and this. It also doesn't help that a lot of people feel like their rights come from a higher power, that rights are inalienable or come from God and stuff like that. These ideas are nice, but the problem is that it makes people not want to get involved. The ideas that the laws are inalienable or are based on common sense and can't be taken away have two effects. Number one, it does make people feel like their country is good because the laws are good. And of course, in really insane situations, people can rise up and go into an armed rebellion and fight. But most situations, that's not the reaction of society. Most situations, it's, that sucks for that guy. He just lost all of his stuff, his house and car, or he's been in jail for 80 years for a crime he didn't commit. But nobody's going to take up arms for that. And so you have the secondary effect, which kind of, I think, is more insidious and subconscious, which is that, oh, since our rights come from God or are inalienable, it doesn't really matter what the legislature does. I'm not going to really care, and I'm not going to try and influence it, and it's too complicated anyway. And then when they make a rule I don't like, I'm just going to say, oh, my rights are inalienable and the Constitution this and that. And honestly, the Constitution and the whole inalienable rights thing and the Bill of Rights and all of that, they're there to restrain the legislatures and restrict them from doing certain things that have been articulated in those documents. But those are a last line of defense. Legislatures shouldn't just be allowed to just go crazy and write random laws. And it would help if people didn't feel like none of it ever mattered, because maybe more people would actually look into these details when they did come up. But right now, there's a really big sense of, since our rights are inalienable and we have the Constitution there to protect us, we can really just ignore everything that's being passed into law. And if something happens to us, then we can make a big stink about it. But if something happens to our neighbor, they'll have to deal with it. Who cares? And it just, in my opinion, that idea doesn't help either. The idea, and I feel like that idea is sort of an extension. So the idea of inalienable rights and God-given rights and all of that is an extension of the idea of common sense and fairness. And I think it infuriates a lot of people to hear this. But the reality is that I have gone through litigation for 6 years by myself against an attorney. And nobody else is going to come out and save the day for you when you're going through it. And it really changes your perspective when you actually go through it yourself and you see that there are statutes that are controlling your case and are driving everything in the direction that it's going, and that nobody's going to come up and help you. Nobody's going to swoop in and give you money. Nobody's going to go out and form a mob outside the courthouse or protest. None of that's going to happen. What's going to happen is the laws, the crazy ones that were written, if they were crazy, or the incompetent people that are presiding over your case, if they're incompetent, are driving your life in a certain direction that may or may not suck really bad. And so that's why I'm saying all these things that I'm saying, because guess what? Common sense and fairness did not drive my decision in the direction that it went. My decision went the way it went because of statutes, rules, and case law. I figured that out. I grabbed it with both hands, and I drove that thing into primary physical sole legal custody. And I drove that machine right down the road of termination of parental rights, because that's what it took to protect my child. It was not going in like to Judge Judy and just talking. That's not what did it. So I gave 2 examples. I'm not sure if I'm going to give any other. If I give another example, it'll be towards the end of the video. What I wanted to say is this. If you think that common sense and fairness is actually the answer to the problem, you haven't seen my video on discretion. The idea that and please watch that video. The idea that common sense and fairness is the answer to the problem of corruption and moneyed interests and attorneys is based on it's a fantasy notion. Because the only way that would work is if that attorneys you went up against walked into court and were constrained by citing statutes, rules, and case law. Yet you were allowed to walk into court and fall back on general principles of fairness and common sense and equality to win your case. But that is not what happens. Again, watch my video on discretion. Your opponent, their attorney, will use anything and everything at their disposal to defeat you. And fairness and common sense can be interpreted in so many different ways. And that attorney will absolutely exploit that to defeat you. And when it comes to, again, watch my video Discretion, when it comes to widening the latitude that discretions and judges, that attorneys and judges have in their cases, when it comes to widening that latitude, many people think that that is going to be favorable to the little guy. The non-attorney that is helpless and meek and poor and doesn't have counsel is going to get that help. And the judge is going to see that they're the little guy, and they're going to apply all that, the discretion that they have and all of those ideas of fairness, they're going to apply that to the little guy, and they're going to rule against that attorney. That is completely and totally not at all based on reality. Because when I went into court for 6 years battling against an attorney, when the law was not on her side, that is exactly what she went to do. She went when the law wasn't favorable, and my ex had multiple attorneys, some were female, some were male. They wouldn't argue the law. They would fall back on the judge's discretion, ideas of fairness, ideas of common sense as to why I shouldn't get what I'm asking for. And every single time that the judge, well, not every single time, most of the time that the judge had discretion, the judge ruled in favor of the attorney, not me. And again, I've probably said this 5 times by now. I explained why this happens in the video Discretion. Those attorneys have relationships with the judges. They go to school with them. They're in and out of court all the time. They talk to them outside of the courtroom, whether they're on a lunch, whether they're just, shooting the shit, at a meeting or whatever. I mean, the relationship that an attorney has with the judge is always going to dwarf the relationship that you, an outsider, a nobody who just has come off the street, and quite frankly, when your case is over, you'll never see them again. That relationship, you're never going to beat that relationship. You will always be an outsider. You will always be a person that the judge thinks, I'm going to see this guy for a little while, I'm never going to see him again. That attorney, I'm going to see them for a few decades. That attorney may be that attorney and that attorney and that attorney and that attorney. Those guys are the ones that are going to give me campaign funds. This little guy isn't going to give me crap. Those attorneys are going to be the ones that help me get promoted to the Supreme Court. They will always have a stronger relationship with the judge than a non-attorney, and there is no way on earth that any non-attorney can get around that. Even rich people, even millionaires that own businesses that go into court will encounter this problem, and that's why they hire attorneys. So if it's not fairness and common sense and fuzzy principles of right and wrong that come to the aid of a non-attorney, then what does? In my experience, I won when I could use the law. When I had a statute that the attorney just could not get around, I would win. When there was a court rule that bound the court into doing a certain thing, I would win. That's why I do videos like this, to tell people what works, because people who come to my channel are not here for some kind of political discussion or a debate. They're here because they're in a case right now, and they need to win their case right now with the rules and the statutes and the case law that exist right now. It's not like people are coming here to win an argument on what's right and wrong and what laws should exist and shouldn't. People are here to take the case that they're fighting right now and win their case. And so that's why again, towards the beginning of the video, I meant for this video to not be just like a general philosophical discussion. I meant for this video to drive people in the direction of research and statutes, rules, and case law. And some of the resistance that I've encountered, sometimes in my inbox, has been from people that just don't think it's right, that you shouldn't have to spend all this time to learn how the law works to win your case. You should just be able to go in and talk. Well, for the people who are saying that, what you're saying is that general principles of fairness, right and wrong, and morality should win your case. And you should go in there and say, this is what's fair and moral, and so I should win. The problem with that is there's so many different perspectives as to what's fair and moral. And if that was actually the way the system worked, a non-attorney would hardly ever win, because that's exactly what the attorneys would do. Whatever works, attorneys use. Well, I explained this in my video, Win at All Costs. People hire attorneys to win. They don't hire attorneys to be fair to the other side and to respect the law and follow the law and do all their research and let the other side do whatever they want. No, people hire attorneys to win. So if you make it all about fairness and equality and right and wrong, the attorney is going to use fairness and equality and right and wrong. And when you have 2 or 3 different perspectives of what's right and wrong and fair, and a judge has to choose between a non-attorney and an attorney, the attorney is most of the time going to win because the attorney has the clout and the relationship with the judge. The only reason I got where I got in my 8 years of representing myself against attorneys is because I cited statutes, rules, and case law. And I bound the lawyers and the judges into going the way that the law said they had to go. That's the only way I could trump the relationships that they have with each other. And it's the only way that I could actually get around the fact that I had no hope at all of relating to the judge, and that I couldn't afford. I mean, ultimately what's supposed to win is the law, and you pay these people to cite the law. So for the people out there who can't afford an attorney, the logical solution would be for them to figure out what the law is without an attorney, because they really don't have the money to buy an attorney. The logical solution is not, let's just throw away this whole system and just make it all about fairness and equality. Because of what I said in the earlier part of the video, there are a lot of different perspectives as to what's fair and equal. And so I really think I've covered everything I can in this video. One last thing I wanted to mention: if you really did have a system that was based on what's fair and right and wrong and equality, you would have a system where things were unequal and chaotic. Different judges would have different perspectives. And so if you have 25 different judges, you would have 25 different decisions coming from those judges. You wouldn't have much consistency. Maybe in certain areas you would, but not in all areas. And what would happen is that instead of rule of law, you would have rule of person, rule of man, rule of woman. The person wearing the robes would basically become a law unto themselves, if you think about it. That person would be the law, because whatever they say is what's fair and right, and therefore the law. And that's not a really good thing, because, well, number one, nobody would really be certain as to what outcomes would be because of all the different perspectives of fairness. And so what would happen is you'd have the courts would be even more jammed, because more people would be willing to go to court to figure out what the actual what the ruling would be. And when you have more consistency and when you have actual rules that all of the judges have to follow, people can predict outcomes better. And if people can predict an outcome, they'll just avoid the court process to begin with. Whereas in an ideal world, that's what they would do. You would have attorneys that would say to their clients, this is what the law is, this is what's going to happen, so let's just settle the case. You wouldn't have attorneys saying, well, we will probably get this outcome, but it's really up to the judge what they feel is fair and right, so let's give it a shot. I think you would have a lot more litigation if you just had no rule of law at all, if just whatever person wearing the robes was there. And also, that's why I think a lot of countries that have similar systems that are more wing it and random, I think that's also why they have weaker businesses and all of that, weaker economies and stuff, whereas countries with a more strict system of rules and controls has typically better or healthier businesses and corporations and all of that. And it probably comes down to them being able to predict outcomes better, and thus wanting to invest their money in a place where they perceive things to be more stable, predictable, and all that. So there's a lot of little things that come out of this video. I really hope people understand where I'm going with the video. Oh, I did promise in the middle of the video that I would explain that fairness does come into play when it comes to writing statutes. And when you're in a democracy, for the most part, politicians understand that they're voted in by the citizens. And for the most part, in most situations, not all, the politicians will understand that the majority of the public may have a specific idea of what's fair. And if it's pretty consistent, or if that's what the majority of the public thinks, typically that's what they'll write into law. So it's not like I'm trying to say that fairness doesn't matter and these lawmakers can do whatever they want. Obviously, that's not true because we have a constitution. In theory, if we didn't have a constitution, they could pass whatever law they wanted. The Constitution is one of the documents that's there that basically is a law that talks about what laws you could write. When you take that away, there's not really many restrictions on what laws could be written, and it's basically a country where the legislature can write whatever law they feel like writing. And there have been examples in the past of laws that people would be shocked to hear that were written, like laws that allowed for the chemical castration of gays, and they were used. They did. There was a guy, a big guy in computer science. I think his name was Alan Turing. He was chemically castrated because he was gay, and that was legal. They made a law, and it said if you're gay, you get chemically castrated. I'm sure I'm simplifying it. There may be more to it than that. But he later on killed himself because of what the government did to him. There wasn't, they didn't feel that that was against the law, and lawmakers passed it, and the majority of the public supported it. So, there's different countries all over the world, and they have different ideas of what's fair. In our country, people can have guns, and if you don't like it, too bad. In other countries, they think we're crazy. What's wrong with those Americans and their guns? They're nuts. Different people have different perspectives as to what they think is right and wrong. And the majorities of these different countries have completely different ideas. And so all I'm trying to say is, if you want to win your case, you have to understand that your idea of what's fair and right will not control your case. The government's idea, as enacted by the legislature, as voted for by the majority of the citizens, of what's fair and right will control your case. The laws that they write will control your case. They will drive your case in a very specific direction. So figure out how those laws and rules work, because that's your best hope for controlling your case. I tried to be nice in the beginning of my case to the judge and the lawyer, and it got me I'm not going to say it didn't get me anywhere. It got me somewhere. It got me joint physical custody. I'm very appreciative of that. My family judge helped me out in the beginning. I was as nice as I could be, and he was nice in return to me, even though I didn't have an attorney. And he helped me out in certain areas. In other areas, I didn't get much help at all. My ex got a restraining order for allegations of domestic violence that never occurred. The judge believed it, and I was just screwed. But, you can't always win everything. If you want to see how I dealt with that, watch my video on restraining orders, because ultimately that didn't hold me back. I still got to terminate my ex's parental rights. But anyway, what I was trying to say is, I understand where you're coming from if you want to just be the nice person, and it might get you somewhere, at least for a short amount of time. But in a high conflict child custody case, there are limitations as to how far you will get with that. And in certain cases with certain incompetent judges, you won't get anywhere with it at all. You'll find yourself nowhere fast. So if you want to be nice, do your research also, just so that you can use it if you need to. Don't just trust the system to do the right thing. Do everything you can to research the statutes, rules, and case law that will control your case. And if you want to be nice, but keep those in the back of your mind, because you don't know when you're going to have to pull those out. You don't know when you're going to have to just take the gloves off and fight, not just your ex, but the system. So I hope this video was helpful to people. Again, remember, it's not supposed to be a philosophical discussion. What I'm trying to do is discredit these ideas that laws don't matter or shouldn't matter, that the system is stupid and you should just go to a system where you can just talk normal and use common sense and fairness and all that. And I'm trying to discredit those ideas, because those ideas don't actually lead in any useful direction for non-attorneys, because I have gone through so much litigation with my ex's attorneys, and anywhere that there was discretion, the attorneys exploited it every time. And if you think you're just going to attack this situation by training judges and scolding them and firing them, and no, it's not going to work. There's so many judges that are coming in and out of those judicial departments all the time. You have no hope at all of training all of these judges and keeping track of them all and firing the ones you don't. It's not going to happen. The best hope any system has at helping non-attorneys and poor people is a strict control of what's supposed to go on in those courtrooms, because statutes, rules, and case law were the only hope that I had at controlling the outcome in my case. It was the only way I could defeat my ex's attorney, and it was the only way I could control the judge. And I'm starting to see it in a lot of my viewers' victories as well. If you haven't seen my video, Viewers Victory number 1, watch the video, because that's what he did in his case, and he won his case too. And everyone was trying to drive that case in some random direction that made no sense at all. Both of the attorneys and all of the people involved, the judge, and the only way that he was able to save his child was to grab that case with both hands and steer that case in the direction it needed to go. And what did he use? Statutes, rules, and case law. And what did he get? Primary physical, sole legal custody. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and end this video, and definitely post something in the comments below if you have something to say. I will see you guys next time.